Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the launch of Crannóg 58. I hope you can hear me because there isn't any PA system this evening, unlike other launches, so I have to shout, but I'm a bit hoarse as well. So again, you're all very welcome to the launch of Crannóg number 58. It's great to see the big crowd here tonight. Great to see so many new faces and so many familiar faces as well. I nearly said old faces. Familiar faces. If it's your first time at a Crannóg launch, well, you're especially welcome. And of course, even if it's your 58th time at a Crannóg launch, you're equally welcome. Everybody's welcome. We dedicate this particular issue to the memory of Kevin Higgins, whom you may know passed away last January. Kevin was a dominant figure, you might say, in the literary life of Galway. He had a presence, so it's hard to believe that he's gone. We have included a poem of his at the start of the magazine. The last poem he read here at a Crannóg launch last September only, end of September, at the launch of our previous issue, number 57. So it's sad to see that he's gone, and once again we extend our sympathies to Susan, his wife, and to his family. So we have 10 readers tonight between poetry and fiction. We have, I think, 4 fiction readers and six I almost did the maths wrong there, 6 poetry readers. Right, so we'll start with our first reader, and he is David Butler. And David has published a novel with New Ireland called City of Dis, that's D-I-S, and it was shortlisted for the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year in 2015. And Ireland House published his second short story collection, which is called Fugitive, in 2021. And to read his story, which is called The Bind, would you welcome David Butler.
The only thing you need to know about this story, if you need to know it, is just that I worked in Carlow for about 5 years. So it's meant to be in a Carlow accent, which I don't have, but there we go. The Bind. I knew the minute I heard the body had been found up in Cullen that it was Ruby done it. I knew, sure as if he'd been told me he was planning it, which he pretty much did, one way of looking at it. That's what has me in the bind I'm in. He come out here about a week. Sure, I hadn't seen Hayden or hair of the fucker in months. Was a time you wouldn't have seen one of us propping up the Pikeman or Bridge Tavern with that the other was there too. But that was before I took the crack in the skull in the county final we lost to the Crokes. Fractured my eye socket, it did. And the next thing, the eye gets infected. After they took the eye, I was never any use judging the flight and dip of the slitter. So that was that. Game over for Muggins here. Things went belly up with Trish about then too. And the worst I can say on that subject is, it was my own stupid fault on account of I spent the next 6 months sulking and taking it out on her till she'd had enough and broke off the engagement. Of course then, the following year, they went on and won the county final, the feckers. Which was all right. I was happy for them. Genuinely I was. Only Ruby now being captain, it was him as to be filling the trophy with punch and making the speeches and quips that by rights I'd have been making if it hadn't have been for Stumpy Corrigan's dirty pull that cost me a lot more than the county final, so it did. All that happened a long time ago, and it's old history now, and I wouldn't be bringing it up. Only it'll give an idea how surprised I was to hear Ruby Riley's boy Racer gunning into the yard there last Tuesday week. How are you ahead? He goes, with a big stupid grin on the bollocks, as if the 7 years in between had never happened, and he hadn't married Trish Gallagher. Still swinging the devil by the tail, he goes. But I could tell how shook he was underneath by the palsied fingers dropping the car keys, and how his eyes flitted about the farm and wouldn't settle on my one eye. What has you out this way? I ask, all business-like. No intention of making things easy for the fucker. Can't a man drop out anymore for a social call, or what the hell way is the country gone? And we might have gone on talking shite all evening, only his phone blinked, and I seen him flinch when he clocked who the message was from. Then at last he looks square at me and goes, "Look it, Patch, we need to talk. Can we go somewhere?" I was back living at home this long time, and he didn't want the old one earwigging on whatever it was he had to tell me. "Would he go for a sneaky one?" says I, for I've a queer thirst to me these days. "I'd as soon go for a walk," says he, and I knew then it was a serious business that brung him out. I wish to God now I told him where he could go with a serious business. But there we are, with hindsight, as the fella says. Long story short, he got himself in with this queer one beyond in Graig. Things hadn't been going so well with Trish, not since his old fella's business went tits up last March. They were God knows how many months behind on the mortgage repayments. Has a bit of a temper on him, Ruby. And the dogs in the street knew Trish was living back with her people out in Loughlin Bridge. Now I should say, by the time Ruby Riley and Trish Gallagher got hitched a couple of years back, I was over her. If I didn't go to the wedding itself, it was because I wasn't invited. It wasn't. It wasn't because I wasn't invited. It was that I'd gone off the rails drinking at the time, and I'd have probably made a show of myself once the demon drink got a hold. Because one thing I'll say, whether it's on account of the PTSD or whatever they do call it, after losing the eye, the drink does send me into a dark place an odd time. Which is why I'm barred out of the pikeman, which is saying something. So Ruby tells me this queer one from beyond in the Graig is ringing him and texting him ever since and won't leave him alone. Ever since what? Says I. And the squint he throws me is as much as to say, would you cop onto yourself, you know well what? So then I ask him, what was he thinking getting involved with some brasser in the first place? Because one thing I'll say for Trish Gallagher, she never lost it. If I wasn't jealous of the bollocks marrying her, it was only because I've always wanted the pure best for Trish. I couldn't have stood the idea she might have gone through with marrying me on account of she felt sorry for me losing the eye. Like I say, I can be my own worst enemy. Look at Patch, my head was all over the shop. Trish and myself was after having this big bust up. Not just on account of the mortgage either, that's all I can say on the subject. Then she gets on her high horse and moves back in with her folks up on Loughlin Bridge. So I'm out one night in the dungeon, acting the aged with a few of the lads, and a feed of drinking me. And I'm outside having a smoke, when this owl one starts giving me the sympathetic ear, and, well, I don't know what devil got into me, Patch. I mean, she's no spring chicken, anything but. But the next thing I'm back in her gaff, so I am, and I'm that angry with Trish at the time, that I think, fuck it. And now I can't get shot of her. She's ringing and texting all hours. Then yesterday, right? She threatens she'll call out to Loughlin Bridge to introduce herself to Trish. If I don't meet up with her, I swear to you, I'm that close to... His next words, whatever they were strangled by the rage. Well, says I, where do I come into any of this? Though I knew well enough the way Ruby's mind was calculating. Couple of months after the business with the eye socket, Ruby Riley and a bruiser by the name of Dinny Foley set on Stumpy Corrigan one night with a couple of hurls. Though he's a brick shithouse of a fucker. Long and short of it was, he never played senior hurling again. And I was delighted, because he was one dangerous fucker, had a reputation for throwing the slitter right up into your face before pulling across it. Dinny Foley's out in Australia this long time. All the same, I knew well, before ever he said it, that Ruby had the whole business with Stumpy Corrigan in mind when he come out to see me. All I want you to do is put the frighteners on her. Just give her one decent fright is all. Pull on a balaclava, smash a couple of flower pots, put in a windshield of her car. Only be sure she sees you doing it. Why don't you do it yourself? She'd have the guards on me as why. She works for Rattigan, the lawyer. So I'll have to have a watertight alibi for the night you're doing it. I'm not doing it. You're not. I'm not scaring some biddy out of her wits for you, Ruby. It wouldn't be for me. It'd be for Trish. For Trish? How do you figure that? Think about it. Now that was Ruby all over, twisting an argument backways, so it was never Ruby Riley was at fault. And that's what did it for me. After that, there was no way on God's earth I was doing a turn for him with his it'd be for Trish. So when I heard a woman's body had been found up beyond in Great Cullen, I knew well it was Ruby done it. Then yesterday he calls out again. You believe the cunt? I hear his boy racer growling along for a country mile before he pulls into the yard. Get in, he goes, not deigning to look at me. I do. I couldn't tell you why. And off he speeds, skidding around the back roads of Carlow like a demented rally driver. And he that agitated, he won't look at me while he explains what happened. Of course, none of it's his fault. His head is literally all over the shop by the time he's out in her place, threatening her if she goes next her near Leckton Bridge, what he won't do to her and her precious cocker spaniel, Pixie. And then she tells him she's pregnant. Christ's sake, she's pushing 50. There's no way she's pregnant. And after what? 3 weeks, like? But she swears blind, and this lecherous leer on her puss, I swear to you, Patch, if you've seen it. So I see in red, she has me that agitated, that instead of taking a swipe at her telly like he intended, I let fly at her with the hurl. And I must have caught her on the temple or something, because she went down and never got up again. Suddenly he's pulling a handbrake and spitting up gravel out by the quarry, and the force has me thrown flat against the door before we stop. He sits stock still, white knuckles gripping the wheel, his eyes big as gobstoppers. What he says next is deathly calm. If you done what I asked you, none of this had happened. Why are you telling me this? He looks at me like I'm a right spastic. He pokes a finger into my chest. There's no shake today. And he goes, I was with you all last night is why. Where? I don't give a fuck where, Patch, wherever you want. I was home with the old dear all last night. Then I was with yous. You tell her, yeah? I'm not bringing my mother into this, no way. Okay, so then we were somewheres else. I don't give a... Why me? Couldn't you ask someone else, Ruby? You, I'm asking. But why? Because you're the only one knows. And that makes you an accessory, Achara. You're an accessory before and after the fact. How'd you figure that? Because I told you all about her, Patch. I told you before I done it, and I'm telling you again now. Eyes of the law, that makes you an accessory. So, there it is, the bind I'm in. Fucked if I know what I'm supposed to do. I could just go to the guards, tell them what I know. I mean, he never actually said he was going to lay a finger on her. As for him telling me afterwards, how does that make me guilty? For listening, like? But if word got out I'd turn grass, Jesus, because I'd be called on to give evidence. Then say he wasn't convicted. Strengthen my word alone. You see what I'm saying? Simplest would be, go along with what he's asking. The old dear's not going to know. I can leave her well out of it. But then, like I say, I've always acted in Trish Kelleher's best interests. That's why I didn't stand in the way when she first hooked up with Ruby Riley. But do I really want her to go back to him, and he a murderer? And worse again, one that did the dirt on her.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. Very well read, despite the lack of a Carlow accent. Our next reader is Stephen Shields, and Stephen has been published in Poetry Ireland Review, in the Stony Thursday book, Agenda, The Shop, and of course previously in Crannóg. So to read his poem called Calvary, would you welcome Stephen Shields?
And thanks, David. You've restored my faith in Carlow. The last man I met from Carlow was in a traffic accident, and it was my fault, but there was no damage done. But my insurance company upped my premium anyway. I submitted 3 poems when I was submitting this poem as well. And I put a rather gruesome title over the three poems about death. So the two that didn't come in were a bit gruesome and ominous, I'm afraid. So this one, I think, is a bit lighter. Calvary. Golgotha is to the east. The pink tint sky tries to dispel the night. We carry swathes of linen. Our apothecary has furnished all the spices for embalming. A powder of myrrh, frankincense, canopic jars perfumed with herbs. Prepared for a simple burial, we are surprised by the stone rolled back, an angel armed with light.
Thank you, Stephen, for that. Our next reader is Luke Power. Luke has been published in New Irish Writing, in Ropes, in Sonder and other places. And he is working on a novel, which we look forward to seeing someday. So would you welcome, please, to read his poem, which is called City in October in the Rain. Luke Power.
It's a pleasure to be published in Crannóg. And the poem itself is fairly self-explanatory. There's no guesses or no prizes for guessing which city it is. It's the only city worth writing poetry about. Dublin. No. Galway. It's about Galway. This is City in October in the Rain. Cars surge through the nightlife. Urban ships setting out into open water. Tires leaving a rippling wave in their wake. There's more than just muck, more than road water. See the yellow street lamps, headlight flash and stars, all rushing over the shoes of a young woman, a man. And from that wave a ripple further, of swears and curses and then laughter peeling off down side streets, badly lit but for the glow of cigarettes caught in conversation, like fireflies, like stars. And did I mention the rain? It spreads the canvas for this cold Saturday in soft sheets coursing. And suddenly there's poetry, and people huddle together under wind-whipped umbrellas, the young man in love for just a loving young man, throwing his jacket across his companion's street lamp yellow. Their steps unsteady from wine and shared laughter. Older souls, knowing better, wait it out, hold the line. Those stooped streetlights and spectres watching time disappear across cobbles, moving on down towards the sea, the pier, and still it falls, painting this city or perhaps revealing it. The raindrops restless and maddening and wonderful. I'm moving through the downpour now and moved by it, feeling beneath the noise and anxieties which breed and gain interest that there is a kind of peace settling at the bottom of myself, a yellow glow, a whispering flame, a wondering which hasn't yet got a name. And while those moths who gather around flickering heaters lose themselves in the night and in their youth, I keep on through the rain, the city murmuring its songs to the listener, the watcher, the mute. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Luke. That was lovely. The next reader is Kian Ferreter, and Kian's first published poem was in Crannóg in issue 51. But since then, he has gone on to win many prizes. In 2019, he won the Westable International Poetry Competition, and in 2020, he was a runner-up in the Gregory O'Donoghue International Poetry Prize, and in 2021, he was highly commended in the Troubadour International Poetry Prize. His debut chapbook is called Earth's Black Chute, C-H-U-T, and that won the 2022 Munster Fools for Poetry competition, and it was published by Southward in last year in May 2022. So to read his poem, which is called The Day the Satellites Went Down, would you welcome Kian Ferreter?
Thanks a million, Tony, and the rest of the Crannóg team. As Tony has touched upon, Crannóg has a very special place in my heart. It being the publication that I had my first published poem in, so I'm particularly delighted to be back. It was a very short poem, that poem. It was a single sentence and it was not even 40 words. And I made the mistake of trying to compensate for its brevity by a far too elaborate introduction. My work has taken a kind of a Miltonian twist since then. I'm up at about 100 words tonight, so we can cut down on the introduction. I'm not a big fan of poets kind of explaining what poems are about. And I remember being at a book launch at Paula Meehan, and she told a great story about 3 schoolgirls ringing on her door in Baldoyle. She had a poem on the Leaving Cert syllabus, and they were there kind of in their uniforms and their Leaving Cert poetry book in hand, and they were there to ask her what her poem meant because they wanted to get some insights for the Leaving. And she told them that she said, which I thought was a great response, I haven't a clue what it's about, I only wrote it. So that's my excuse for tonight's poem. While I have the camouflage of the book here, I have a special middle-age large font print of it that I'd read from. The day the satellites went down. His car engine was still running, miles from where they found him. A trail of sorts in his wake, muddied shoe, phone glinting like a dropped earring, jacket suspended from a branch like a small life. No one could work out why he chose that spot. Never more alive, he said later. Crown of his head pressed to the gap, fern fronds like jump leads against his temples, his tongue lapping the black juice of the bog. Still talked about in the office. From the desk that used to be his, I replay the scene. Low gasps, light breeze, the soft pink soles of his feet, quivering like a newborn, filling her lungs with alien air.
Thank you very much, Kian, for that. It's a great quote from Paula Meehan. I'll use it again sometime. We're back to fiction now with Joanne Hayden. And Joanne is a writer and arts journalist, and her fiction has been shortlisted for the Francis McManus Award and published in journals Ambit, Banshee, York Literary Review, Splunk, and previously in Crannóg. Her play Salvage was shortlisted for the 2021 Fishamble /ESB Tiny Plays for a Brighter Future Award. So to read her story, which is called Career Path, would you welcome Joanne Hayden?
Thank you. It's really lovely to be here, and a big thank you to Tony and Ger and Sandra and Jarlath for including my story. I'm going to read an excerpt from it. Career path. Age 5, paleontologist. Yesterday in the park, Sam dawdled to dig through leaves with a stick. Trillions of leaves, orange and crunchy, mushier underneath. Snug in his gloves and dino jacket, his breath made smoke in the air, shooting shapes that tumbled and curled and disappeared before 1, 2, 3. He dug up an empty crisp packet and a ketchup slobbered box. Could barely hear the others. It was like being alone in the world. Scary and fun, the same tummy wobbles as before he jumped off the too-high wall. Ellie came back. He knew she would. First, he saw her legs and feet. She bent down. Her cheeks were red. See-through snot dribbled onto her lips. She magicked a tissue from under her sleeve. Maybe you'll find an antler, she said. Once they'd found a pigeon fossil in their garden, and another time a broken plate. Ellie told her mum the plate was Paleolithic and to ring the woman who did the news. Yesterday, Ellie dug with her hands and splashed him on purpose with leaves. Oak fetty, she said. Bury me, Sam lay down. I want oak fetty up to my head. Ellie didn't bury him. She lay on the leafy bed too, and they twisted their heads so they were staring at each other. Let's make leaf angels, she said. He copied how she moved her arms and legs, clearing the leaves into wings, him and Ellie laughing and flying till their dad came huffing back, saying, "Come on, William, Mum's gone ahead. We're going to look at the President's house." They looked at the President's gates and the President's fence and the President's thorny moat. Then they went to the tea rooms, warm, but Sam kept his jacket on so the stags and T-Rexes and pterosaurs could see what was happening. His mum queuing at the counter, his dad opening a paper someone had left behind. Sam used his phonics to try and read a word. "What's turn?" he said. "You turn," his dad said. "The opposite of me turn," Ellie said. His dad laughed. "My me turn is your you turn." They were teasing Sam and leaving him out, and that wasn't kind or fair because Ellie was 3 years older than him and could understand reading jokes. But he didn't whinge or tell them to stop. He climbed up onto his dad's knee and taught them a tongue twister he'd learned in school. Sheep should sleep in a shed. His mum brought the hot chocolates. Ellie plonked her marshmallows into Sam's cup. "Since when do you not like marshmallows?" his mum said. "Since 9:15 this morning," Ellie said. And Sam's mum told him he had a marshmallow moustache. And he told her he was given the day 1,000 out of 10. Age 10, wizard. He'd finished with these books a year ago, so why was he flicking through them again? Lying in bed instead of at his desk, but Mum never checked his homework anymore. Too busy with work and worry anger, always in Ellie's room going on about love and "Talk to me, Elle, it's so important to talk." He could hear Mum's footsteps going down the stairs and Ellie turning pages on the other side of the wall, sulking, because now, for her own good, gymnastics was on the not allowed list. No running, no press-ups, no star jumps. And Dad said they might have to get rid of the trampoline. Sam still used the trampoline. If anyone would notice, he'd sulk as well. Ellie had helped him read these books. The two of them would charge around in their cloaks, pointing their wands and shouting. They used to know all the spells, ones for water and light, forgetting. Was there a spell to make someone want to eat? Last night, Sam was on his way to the kitchen to get a drink of apple juice. He heard Mum and Dad whisper arguing and stayed listening at the door. "So bloody stubborn," Dad said. "Always was. Remember as a toddler she wouldn't go to bed. She'd lie rigid on the floor so we couldn't pick her up." "It's more complicated than stubbornness," Mum said. "We need to be constructive here." "How complicated is it," Dad said, "to chew and swallow your food? Eat when you're hungry. It's as basic as that. We've given them too much choice." "We meaning me?" "Seriously? You're going to make this about yourself?" A year ago, Sam's bedroom walls were covered with posters from the films. Wizards, Dueling, The Flying Car, Undesirable Number 1. Now there was just the Liverpool team and a sign saying "This is Anfield," and the marks the blue tack had left behind. He was embarrassed he'd been so obsessed. He dropped the books. 7 thumps. An idea landed in his head. Mum had kept the toy cooker. "For my grandchildren," she said. It was in the spare room, on top of the filing cabinets. He made steps from 2 of the drawers. Tricky to climb, but he made it. The plastic food was still there, in the oven on a tray. He threw it all down and went to knock on Ellie's door. "Go away," she said in a sniffly voice. "It's me," he said. "Fine." He walked to her desk, holding the tray, feeling like he needed to pee. She stared and stared at the fake food, her eyes bubbling in her bony face. She might shout, worse, maybe she'd cry, but she smiled and turned back to herself, and the prickles left his chest and disappeared from the room, as though someone had let in air. She picked up the cheese. Yum, put it in her mouth. There was no spell to make it real. He knew the magical laws. Food couldn't be conjured up from nothing, and even if it could, he wouldn't prank her like that. She spat the holy triangle across the room, nearly hit the radiator. "Some haddock, sir." She pointed to the tray. He put the whole fish into his mouth, chewed as long as he could, then shot it almost as far as the cheese. A cookie for her, a lemon for him. They turned their mouths into pellet guns, chewing and spitting until Ellie's carpet looked like after the food fight in school, and they were interrupted by Mum coming in with slices of real cheese and bread. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joanne, for that. Thank you very much. I think this might be a good time to take a short break of about 10 minutes or so, and we'll come back for some more poetry and fiction in about 10, 15 minutes. 10 Irish minutes. Okay, we're going to start the second half, and we're going to start off with a story this time, and the story is from Monica Igo. Monica worked for a number of years as a journalist in London, in Cork and in Dublin, and also in Galway, and this is her first published short story. So would you give a big hand, please, to Monica Igo as she reads her story called Kiki.
Well, thank you. Thanks to Crannóg. I'm delighted to be here. And okay, this is just a short extract from a story. The narrator is backpacking in Thailand and she's out of money, and she meets a Dutch man and his prostitute companion. And she's fascinated with the prostitute, or the relationship. Okay. The first time I saw Kiki, I remember she was wearing shorts and a low-cut singlet. I was lying on the private beach owned by Nams. It was the only beach in the vicinity safe for swimming. The morning mist hadn't yet lifted and the place was deserted. I'd already done my 2-kilometre swim and was starting a new book when the pair of them rocked up, linking arms. "Hello," said Dirk, and he flashed his tombstone teeth, dropped to his hunkers and asked what I was reading. It was the off-season and the resort was almost empty, so it was normal enough for Westerners to gravitate towards each other. Dirk said he was on a sabbatical from a university in Amsterdam. Kiki said nothing. Instead, she stared off into the distance, away from the beach and me. I tried to follow her gaze to see what she was so fascinated with, but all I could see was a mass of green-clad trees that blurred into the horizon. She wasn't disposed to small talk, or any talk for that matter, and Dirk didn't introduce her. Dirk and I became close. He had at least 10 years of my 19, and I was in awe of his worldliness. He was an expert on all things Thai. I remember I used to find the villagers' penchant for cockfighting unnerving, but he explained to me that they were normally such gentlefolk, the aggression had to come out some way. Understanding people was his thing. All great literature is about great people, he'd tell me. I suppose that seems obvious now, but back then everything he said seemed profound. Sometimes too we'd go snorkeling and he'd point out the different rock faces and sea life. And sometimes when the rains came, I'd while away the hours in their one-room cabin, chatting with Dirk and sipping on tea or drinking beer, listening to the ropes of rain pounding the rooftops, while Kiki would observe us sulkily from their unmade bed, ostensibly painting her nails or plucking her eyebrows. The last time I saw Kiki was when I called at their cabin to say goodbye. I had rented a Honda 250, and I always enjoyed the spin along the bumpy forest track out to their place. My mother had finally wired me money, and I planned to fly on to Singapore. Dirk gave me a hug and wished me luck. Kiki offered me tea, the first time ever. She looked me square in the face that afternoon, and I noticed her face was swollen and her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. Dirk informed me offhandedly that he'd booked his flight home for 1 month's time. I presumed that was the reason for her foul humour. I wondered if she'd hoped for some sort of long-term arrangement between the two of them, and I shook my head at her innocence. I declined the tea.
Okay, thank you, Monica, for that. The next reader is Bernadette Gallagher. Bernadette is a poet, a widely published poet. In 2021, she received an Arts Council Agility Award, and she has a blog. She blogs at bernadettegallagher.blogspot.ie. So to read her poem, which is called Mycelium, would you welcome Bernadette Gallagher?
Thanks, Tony, and to everybody at Crannóg. Thanks for bringing me halfway from my birth home in Donegal and from my current home in Cork to here in Galway. I'm glad that mycelium is on page 42. As Douglas Adams tells us, it's the answer to everything. Mycelium. A mushroom, its head above the ground, threads below, casting a web, carrying water to the roots of oak, ash, hazel. We gorge on truffle, admire chanterelle, and avoid the enticing fly agaric. Thread from baby to mother, that cord, though broken, still connected by an unseen strand of tissue. A forest floor erupts. Love is always here. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Bernadette, for that. The next reader is Maurice Devitt. Maurice is a past winner of the Trócaire Poetry Ireland competition, and he also won the Poems for Patience competition. He published his debut collection, which is called Growing Up in Colour, with Dira Press in 2018. He is curator of the Irish Centre for Poetry Studies, and his poem, which was nominated for a Pushcart Prize, his poem called The Line Tamer Dreams of Office Work, was the title poem of an anthology published by Hibernian Writers in 2015. So to read his poem called Coffee Morning in Coffee Morning, Herbert Park. Would you welcome Maurice Devitt?
Thanks very much, Tony. And it's lovely to be back at Crannóg. It's a couple of years since I was here, and I was just thinking there. So last time I read here, I can just imagine Kevin Higgins just standing there at the bar. It's just so sad. So, Coffee Morning, Herbert Park. Though it's a cold November day, the low sun entices them outside. To sit in a scrum around a picnic table, the lone smoker adrift at the end of the bench. There is a strict sequence to their conversation, opening with an update on their ailments, progressing to the rugby at the weekend, a roll call of grandchildren, and an update on former colleagues. As work stories unfold, the table is divided. Some, effusive up till then, lapse into silence, perhaps remembering what they did or what was done to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice, for that. We're back to fiction with our next reader. Phil Cummins is a Dublin-born academic and writer, but now living in County Kildare. His short stories and essays have featured in various anthologies and in literary magazines. His writing achievements include honourable mention in 2020 for the Fish Memoir Prize, and in 2022 he was shortlisted for the Memoir Prize. He was shortlisted in 2022 for the Fish Memoir Prize. So to read his story, which is called Ragworm, would you welcome Phil Cummins?
Hello everyone, it's lovely to be here, part of this lovely tradition and to be part of this great community, and thanks to the organisers and that. Okay, some hard acts to follow out there, by the way, guys. I saw my name at the end of the list and I went, shag it. Okay, here we go. Ragworm. Gliding like a great millipede through the oozing mud of the estuary beneath the mussel beds, the ragworm scavages all in its path. There's the common red or harbour ragworm, sometimes referred to by local fishermen as maddies. Then there are the herringbone and white varieties with their unique colorations. But top of the pile is the king rag, a dark, devilish-looking hoor of a thing that can grow to nearly a foot in length and sports an evil-looking pair of black pincers, the bane of many a poor angler's fingers. A much favoured fishing bait, it's been said that the ragworm can tempt virtually anything that swims in the sea by continuing, as it does, to wriggle and writhe long after being skewered on the hook, attempting to squirm to freedom. We made our way, Gilly and I, along the coast road at low tide, my father's garden fork tied up along the rally crossbar with a few lengths of frayed twine. Gilly rode ahead of me, pedalling like a dervish, the bucket dangling off the handlebars of his chopper. Once or twice he instinctively swivelled his curly ginger head leftwards to hike out a big snotty gullier off the unlucky back window of a parked BMW or Audi. "Poshy bastard!" he howled. That was Gilly, my best mate, hardwired for wildness. We stowed the bikes and took a quick slash against the seafront wall. "We'll be rolling in Dosh," said Gilly. They're shelling out £40 a thousand for the rag in town. Sure, we'll have that many picked in a couple of hours. That's a fucking score each, man. He described in detail how he intended to put his half of the money towards another tattoo, one to match the Grim Reaper he'd already gotten on his right shoulder. A raven, perhaps, or maybe even a grinning skull. "Would you not think of getting one as well?" he asked. "They're deadly." "You must be joking," I replied. "Those things don't wash off." "The birds do go mad for the tats," he went on. "They'll get their diddies out for you at the first sight of them." "How would you stop talking shite?" I said, privately wondering if this was actually true. "Does your old fella know you got that done? He'll hop off you when he finds out." Gilly shook his head as he zipped his lad up. "Not yet. Anyway, I'm 16. I can do whatever the hell I like. It's not as if he's ever going to be sober enough to care one way or another." Hefting the bucket and fork, we trudged silently out to the distant mussel beds, shells crunching beneath our wellies as gulls and terns banked and screeched overhead. A light breeze whipped up the sulphury smells of bladderwrack and algae as the late afternoon ferry bound for Holyhead drifted across the horizon. A tennis ball came scooting past us, followed by a dripping golden Labrador in hot pursuit, its anorak-wearing owner whistling after it in the distance. I took up the fork then and set to work, each forkful of wet, sandy mud seeming to weigh a ton as I grunted with the effort of turning it over to expose the squirming treasure beneath. With his feet positioned either side of the growing trench, Gilly crouched with the bucket between his legs, snapping up ragworms before they could bury themselves back into the mud. "Would you look at the size of that cunt?" he hooted gleefully, holding a violently wriggling specimen up for inspection. To my eye, there was no change out of 9 inches long. "Jesus, me outfella makes this look easy in the garden," I huffed after 10 minutes, my forearms and shoulders on fire with the effort of digging. Here, gimme that shagging thing," said Gilly, grabbing the fork off me. "Me granny would dig faster than you. Take the bucket and try to keep up with me." And wielding the fork with a fearful energy, he began digging like a man possessed, the trench quickly lengthening as I scrambled after him to collect up the exposed ragworms. It went this way for a while, the effort of digging soon dripping from the end of his nose. "Here, we'll take a break," I suggested after a good bit. "So we've near 400 picked." "No time," he replied, mopping his brow with the sleeve of his jumper. But I'm banjaxed," I said, rubbing at the ache along my lower back. "The tide's coming back in. We need to make the best of it." And with that, he set to work digging a fresh trench, powering the fork downwards into the mud, as if attempting to spear some giant underground creature. "Here, go easy with that bloody thing," I said nervously, whipping my hand back just in time as he came down swiftly with the fork again. "Give me a chance to pick the damn things up." Stop giving out, Lar. Just think about the payday and fill that bucket." Not taking his advice, I began musing upon the various pleasant ways to blow 20 quid when a tine of the fork skewered the back of my right hand with a soft, crunching sound, instantly pinning me to the ground. My knees folded as my free hand dropped the bucket, its writhing contents tipping out into the trench around me. I felt nothing at first, was only vaguely aware of the fork standing vertical as Gilly just gawped at me, both hands to his face. "Lar, I'm sorry, Jesus, I didn't mean it. I didn't see your hand." His voice was on the edge of tears, an unfamiliar, panicky sound coming from him. Sure, that couldn't be my hand, I thought, looking back down, a mad giggle flying out of me as the image of a kebab flashed through my head. Not the donor sort, you understand, but the type you see in a barbecue with the sharp stick poked through the meat. Then the pain kicked in, a white hot bolt of agony shooting out from the hand that wasn't mine, straight up my arm to register in my brain, my vision darkening with the intensity of it. A warm dribble of piss ran down my thigh to meet the cold seawater soaking into the knees of my jeans. Blood quickly welled up around the tine of the fork and began spilling over to pool in the mud, and I suddenly felt a fierce desire to puke. A tennis ball covered in dog slobber casually bounced into the trench then, rolling over the newly liberated ragworms, and seconds later I felt the warm, panting breath of a dog near my face, as if it was pleading with me to throw the ball again. And just before passing out, I heard another panicked voice, a grown-up voice. Ah, holy Jesus, what's after happening here, lads? What in God's name have yous done? Not the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, for that. Very well read. And we've come to our last reader of the night, and thank you for waiting. She is Emily Cullen, and Emily is the Mescal UL 50 poet in residence. Her third collection is called Conditional Perfect. That was published by Dura Press in 2019, and it was included in the Irish Times roundup of the Best New Poetry of 2019. She is also a harper and a former director of Court International Festival of Literature, and also former director of the Patrick Kavanagh Centenary. So to read her poem, which is appropriately titled The Last Cuppa, would you welcome please Emily Cullen.
Thanks so much, Tony, and to the four editors of Crannóg, and congratulations on issue 58, beautiful issue. This poem was shortlisted for the International Anthony Cronin Short Poem Award last year, and I'm delighted it's found a home in Crannóg. It's given me a little jolt of pleasure every time I've been published in Crannóg, and I've always bought a copy for my mum. And this poem is dedicated to my mum. It's an Easter poem, and she passed away in 2021. The Last Cuppa. On Holy Thursday, the full moon over Holy Cross Abbey, a giant Eucharist in the sky. I try to recall our Last Supper. Before you were burdened with your cross, we were forced to keep apart. We didn't know that cup of coffee, snatched as soon as restrictions lifted, would be our Gethsemane. On Sunday, I dragged my family to Mass for the hope of an empty tomb, first Easter without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for that lovely poem. So that's it. That's the end of the readings. I just want to thank all the readers this evening. Some travelled very far to be here. I want to thank you for that. And indeed, thanks to all the contributors in Crannóg. I want to thank my fellow editorial board members, Ger Burke and Jarlath Fahy. And the fourth member is Sandra Bunting, who's in Canada. And Sandy also has a job of sourcing the cover image for each issue. And she does a great job at that. This image is by Jean Rooney, who's an Irish artist, but living now in Canada, I believe. It's called Red Forest, and very suitable for the time of year as well. Thanks to the Crane for, as I said, the use of the hall. We've had most of our launches here over the years. Not all 58, but 50, 55 maybe. A lot anyway. Also, I'd just like to draw your attention to Ron Delina, the author interview. It's a feature of Crannóg now for the last number of issues. We do an author interview. This one is Ron Delina, who's an American writer. But it's a unique interview in that we ask the same questions of each writer. So it's interesting to see the different responses to the same questions. And it's usually about their writing life, writing schedules, that kind of thing. So that's an interesting feature in the magazine as well. And last of all, thanks to yourselves. It's great to see a big turnout, as I said. It's always encouraging to see such a big turnout at the Crannóg launches. Our next launch is penciled in for the 29th of September. We're very organised, yeah. Submissions open on the 1st of May for the month of May. So we'll be very busy during that time. So again, thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the evening. And we'll be downstairs for a while afterwards if you want to join us down there for some chat. So thank you all very much.